And good afternoon, everyone. Hintayin lang muna natin. Ay, we have already lots of participants na rin pala. But shall we start? Shall we officially? Okay, sige. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our last webinar sa MatE 15. Okay, so for today, we will be discussing some of the applicable laws in materials engineering practice. So we invited two distinguished speakers para magbigay sa atin ng background on the existing policies. Particularly, the first one is about the intellectual property na nag-exist dito sa Philippines. And then also for the second speaker later on, okay, so yung application naman ng hazard identification and risk assessment and control or HIRAC tool para sa occupational safety and health. Okay, so to not keep you wait for longer pa. Okay, so let's begin with our first speaker. Okay, so let me introduce Attorney Nicole S. Malferrari. Okay, so, or Attorney Nikki. She's a lawyer at the Intellectual Property Department of Villaraza and Angangco, VNA Law. Okay, so she passed the bar on April 2022 with exemplary performance. She finished her Juris Doctor at the University of the Philippines, Diliman in July 2021. While at law school, she's been active in several extracurricular activities. She was a president of UP College of Law Block B 2021, champion in Conflicts of Law 2021, which is an e-sport games hosted by Association of Philippines Law Schools of NCR, and part of UP Law Varsity Women's Basketball Team. She was also a recipient of Student Achiever Award for UP Parangal sa Mag-aaral 2021. So Attorney Nikki is also our graduate. So she finished BS Materials Engineering at the Department of Mining, Metallurgical and Materials Engineering of the University of Philippines. She was a research assistant for Nanasilica project of the Plasma Materials Interactions Laboratory. Hello, PMIL. During her undergrad, she was a very active member of UP 49ers and awarded with Outstanding Department Representative when she was a part of UP Engineering Student Council. Okay, so without further ado, let's all welcome Attorney Nicole S. Malferrari.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for that very, very amazing introduction. Actually, hindi ko alam kung saan yun nakuha yung information, pero since department ko naman, very good introduction. Thank you so much. Can I share my slides?
Yes, please. Ay, teka, check ko yung sharing. Okay. So you can try. Ma'am?
Ito, okay.
Okay.
Got it. Okay, let me start. So, good afternoon, everyone. As mentioned a while ago, my name is Nicolette S. Malferrari, or Nikki. Or actually, some of the people in the department know me as Colette, so either way is good. Today, I'll be discussing materials engineers and intellectual property law. So aside from the introduction, I'll just give you a brief trivia of another part of me nung Triple M ako. So ito ako nung graduate ako sa law school. And then this is really what most people in Triple M know me as. Yung babae na may malaking buhok. So in Triple M, I graduated from the Triple M department and from UP Law, as mentioned a while ago. And if you recognize these marks, these are the orgs that I was a part of in Triple M. So if there are people there who are ESC or Niners or, from other orgs, MSS, minors, hello, welcome to this talk. And as mentioned a while ago also, I'm part of the Intellectual Property Department of VNA Law, which is a law firm in BGC. And I started last March. although we've already handled a lot of accounts, which I'll go over in the coming slides. So before we start, this is going to be our flow of discussion for today. So first, we'll start with the basics of IP law. I'm hoping that you'll be able to understand the topic because I tried to make it as simplified as possible so that it's easier to remember. And then second, we will look at why IP law is relevant. Why does it matter to you and to society in general? And third, we will look at the relevance of IP law to you as future materials engineers and to other materials engineers in this video, in this call. And lastly, materials engineers in the legal industry. So actually in our department, we are around 10 lawyers, and then there are 2 lawyers who are from a material science background. So ako, materials engineering from UP, and then there's another one here who's from Ateneo, and then he took up material science. So actually there are a lot of engineers in this field, not only in the firm or in other law firms, but also in government agencies like the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines, which is also in BGC. So before we begin, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Zoom chat box. You can either send it to me or sila Sir Ken, and then I'll get to it at the end of the talk, since we have a portion for questions. And again, you can also raise them during the talk. I don't mind. You can unmute and then you can raise your question. So first, basics of IPL, more commonly known as intellectual property law. So I included this picture for a specific reason. If anyone can tell me why, may prize sila. Pero tingnan na natin anong prize. Pero so this picture is a picture of the glass flagship store of Apple in New York. I included it because surprisingly, actually I didn't know this. I only found out recently, but surprisingly, this flagship store, the design, the architectural design of its glass component is patented. So what does this mean? It means that the design of the store is protected under IP law, which means that nobody can copy it, technically speaking, or nobody can, if somebody does copy it, then the owner, Apple, can actually file for infringement. There's actually technical drawings of this patent. It's really cool. You can search it online. Actually, the applications for patent documents are usually published online. So if you want to check out patent documents, if you're interested, you can look at it. So in this topic, we'll talk about 3 things. What is IP law? Examples of IP law, and what are the different kinds of IP rights that we can get, or you can get. So first question, what is intellectual property? So clue word na yung property. So I'm giving you 4 choices with the emojis on Zoom. So if you want to pick what you think is the correct answer, you can pick from any of these choices and use the emojis to help me get the feel of what you think intellectual property is. So I'll wait for like 5 seconds. Feel free to just react with emojis. So according to the World Intellectual Property Organization, IP is a creation of the mind. So it's a whatever you conjure up in your brain, and then you translate it into either an invention or a logo of a business or a name of a business or a book, for example, or literary works. That's intellectual property. So actually the question was a trick question because all of this, the 4 things I listed, they're types of intellectual properties. So they each have a type of a specific name. So for visible signs of businesses, like for example, McDonald's, yung golden M nila, that's a trademark. So it's a visible sign that distinguishes them from example Jollibee. or Jollibee's yung B nila, forgot his name though, Jollibee yata. And then trade names are just the names of the businesses, not necessarily a distinguishing shape, color, or mark. So it's more of how the business is called or how it is designated or identified. Copyrights for literary or artistic works. So if you wrote a book, an essay, or let's say actually a blog post that's very original, that's copyright material, and it's protected by intellectual property law. Or if you're a photographer and you like taking photos which are very original, those are also copyright material. And lastly, which is very relevant for us as materials or future materials engineers, it's patents. And we're going to delve into patents more later on. So you can see the basis for these descriptions and these identifiers of intellectual property is found in what we call the Intellectual Property Code, which has been amended 3 times. So when you look at the law, when you read the law about IP or anything else, you have to also be very updated. So IP law is very interesting because it's always updating, because it always has to follow the most recent technology, most recent innovations. So since this subject is really focused on innovation, the law also somewhat innovates, like the lawmakers innovate with as to what they will include in the next amendments. So right now, actually, we went to a public hearing, a public consultation in IPO office 2 weeks ago, and they're planning to amend some of the rules again to include 3D logos, color marks, and sound marks. So like imagine that you just have like color black and yellow, tapos ano na yan, parang designation na yan ng business. So very interesting. So small trivia lang para naman may maano kayo, may masabi kayo sa friends kayo after this talk. So if you see the TM there at the bottom right of the Starbucks logo, and the R on top of the Starbucks mark, and the C at the bottom of the panda, those are actually designations or notifications to the public that these marks are either registered marks, trademarks, or trademarks that are being applied for, which means that they're not yet registered. They don't have the complete set of rights yet, or copyright material. I'm guessing that the panda has a copyright logo, yung C na may circle, because it's probably an artistic work, which is why there's copyright. So let's have a short game para mas ma-absorb niya yung different types of intellectual properties that are involved. So again, these are the choices kasi nasa Zoom tayo. So my question is, what type of intellectual property is involved for this one? Is it trademark, trade name, copyright, or patent? So if we recall a while ago, if it's a literary or artistic work, it's a copyright. So if you open the book, parang sa first page, di ba may author doon, tapos may C, that means it's a copyright material. How about this one? Are you guys familiar with this? This is the 2012 Summer Olympic Games logo. So this is a correct trademark. It's actually very interesting. Actually, the Olympic trademarks are specifically protected by special laws in different countries. So it's not only protected by the general IP laws, but they also have specific laws for the Olympic logos. I guess because it's a very popular logo. How about this? This is the incandescent light bulb. This one is, yes, patent, because it's an invention. Technically, it's an invention. So amazingly, they have a copy of the first patent certificate for this. So this is how simple it used to look. It's just the name of the inventor and then the drawing, And then I think they have like a representative at the bottom right, the lawyer for the patent application. So this was nowadays patent certificates are very full of information, so it's a bit complicated to read. But I think for materials engineers, it's a good practice. This one, I think a lot of our MatE practitioners are in this kind of field, semiconductors and nano composites. I think, and sorry, but yeah, I should remove the name. But if we think about the inventions of Intel, Intel has a lot of patents. They have, I think, more than 100 patents. So they always get one whenever they create something new. I think they're called like Intel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, something like that. So what is the purpose of intellectual property? Really, the Supreme Court discusses intellectual property as something that allows the author or the creator to have personal and economic gain. So since it's property, you own it, you have certain rights and you have certain benefits. Sometimes you would ask yourself, why do inventors get all the credit? Why do they get to have the exclusive rights over their invention? Well, first of all, because they invented it. And second of all, if you give people an incentive to create something new, then you're always coming up with new things. So I think it's a balance between innovation and reward. So it's not only to reward the inventors, but to also push for innovation, which is really what our profession is really about. It's not only about studying, but really also applying what we study to create very innovative products. So what is the policy for scientists, engineers, and for future MatE people? Really, actually, the Constitution has a lot of provisions that protect MatE or engineers or scientists' creations in general, because they recognize that scientists are a very important part of any economy. They generate a lot of income. And as per the Intellectual Property Office, the filings for intellectual property rights have a very significant contribution to the economy. So let's say nag-pandemic 2 years ago, parang tumigil lahat ng businesses. But IP rights will always be there. Like, it's electronic. The filings are electronic. I think IPO has the best when it comes to government processes because everything is online. So you can see that the direction of this practice is in the innovative side. So in these provisions, it essentially states that research and development, science and technology are very, very important. And it recognizes that there should be exclusive rights as to intellectual property. So this is the basis for the policy for lawmakers to create laws that help protect inventors or authors' rights over whatever they create. So if you want to look at policies or why lawmakers create certain laws, this is really where they get it from. It's really from the Constitution. Also, in support of the Constitution are the laws in the Civil Code. They expressly mention intellectual creation. So intellectual creations are also property that will allow people to have the benefits of ownership. It's different when you talk about land. There's a different bundle of rights for ownership for land and tangible products. But when they talk about intellectual creations, it's really intangible things like creations of the mind. So parang ang pinaprotect mo is what you were able to create. Your parang kumbaga intellectual intelligence as a person and your actual application of that. So second topic, why does IP law matter? So aside from helping innovation, as I mentioned before, it also helps us with our international relations and our global competitiveness. So sa firm namin, parang marami kaming, most of our clients are actually international clients. And so in order to keep up with them, we have to be updated with laws in terms of intellectual property. So we go to a lot of conferences and talks to discuss new things. Like, for example, the latest talk I think was about metaverse, if you guys have heard of it. Metaverse, NFTs, cryptocurrency, yung mga ganun. So, MatE is also a very expansive field. When I was in college, parang I realized that it has a very wide range of topics. Yung pinaka-interesting back then to me was yung mga applications for biomechanical things and composites. And actually, parang marami ring applications for polymers eh. I recently went to a talk that there was a guy in Mindanao and then he was creating this bamboo composite to be, it's like it serves as a construction material that is cheaper, more sustainable, and durable. So it's really amazing because I think MatE also covers that from what I remember. So we go back to the Supreme Court so that we can, they explain the law really well. So here in this case, they talked about a threefold purpose for patents and patent law. So the first is to foster and reward the inventors, as I mentioned a while ago. So what do you get really? Ano yung reward mo kung naka-invent ka? Kung yung reward mo, bale, are royalty fees if somebody wants to use your patent, or licensing fees if you license it out to someone else. And also, if you transfer it, it's like, since property siya, tas nililipat mo siya, binibenta mo siya. It's kind of like a sale. So you also get money out of whatever you create. It stimulates innovation and permits use. So stimulating innovation because if somebody made an invention and you want to create something else, you want to patent something, or you want to have, patents to your name, parang maengganyo kang gumawa ng thesis na kakaiba. Like, you'd think outside of the box, what other problems need solutions. And then protection of ideas. Why does it protect ideas? So in patents, you have to be very specific as to what you're claiming. So there's a list in a patent application, there are a list of claims that you make as to what is covered under the protection of IP law. So dun, if na-list mo lahat ng claims mo, like I claim this specific organic composition for this medicine. I think esomeprazole has a patent. That's why it's a bit expensive. So that's what they do. They claim the organic chem components. I think that in our time it was Chem 31, pero meron din for MatE. So you guys will get to experience that. Okay, one important rule for IP law in general and patent law is if you have no patent, then you cannot file for infringement. So, kumbaga, it's like saying, you don't have a certificate for that. So there's no proof that you own it. So since there's no proof that you own it, you can't tell anyone else na, hey, that's mine. You can't use my invention. You can't also file for damages for the use of your invention because you don't have a patent. So that's why this process is very important for future engineers and scientists, because once you have a letters patent, you essentially have the right to claim and to sue for infringement against other users of your invention. If you guys are familiar with Apple and Samsung, they all have patents for their phone, for their batteries, for their touch screen devices. That's why some phones can't copy how good their dexterity is. Although, parang as you can see today, there are a lot of touch phones. So Yan, may lifetime din yung patents, which is 20 years. So from an economic or business standpoint, again, from WIPO, which is the World Organization for IP, they list a lot of business benefits. So if may mga BTS fans dito, you would be happy to note that BTS has the most number of trademark registrations in Korea. And they have helped Korea increase their GDP because of those IP rights that they have. So it's like it's also a business perspective. It's also a business aspect that a lot of companies are taking into account. So we have clients like BDO and Crocs and other pharmaceutical companies who make sure that they comply with their maintenance requirements. Because when you have IP rights, you have fees. So I think except for copyright, trademarks and patents have certain fees that you have to pay to maintain. Pero that's I think that's a small price to pay for the amount of income that you are able to protect and generate in terms of royalties and infringement suits and overall maintenance of your IP rights. So what is the relevance to materials engineers? So I know that this topic is a bit parang you would ask yourself, kailangan ko ba yung IP rights or IP law for MatE, or like, what is it to me as a first year MatE student? Actually this field of law is very relevant because it's really this more scientific side of the law. So most of the scientists, I think there are a lot of Filipino scientists who have patents to their names. Parang merong, when I was in M, I think I talked to some of the PhD doctors there and they had patents, especially the ones who went abroad to study. I think when you're abroad, kasi it's a thing to get patents. It's I think it was difficult before here in the Philippines because it was a physical filing, but now since it's online, it's easier. So yun, parang also don't think na you can't invent something worth patenting, because there are patents in the IP field that have been filed by universities. So for sure, the authors of those patents are students. It's really amazing because students themselves are applying for patents. So if you guys are familiar with these drawings, these are types of intellectual property applications that were filed with our intellectual property office. So the first one is, I think, a face shield. Recently filed an application because of the pandemic, most likely. And then the second one is a onion storage dryer, which was filed by Iloilo Science and Technology University. And this one, the last one, is an umbrella. So these are three different types of properties. They're not the same. They are different applications because they have different requirements. So the first one is a utility model. And then the second one is a patent. Surprisingly, ako na-shock din ako. But it's an application, so we'll still see if mag-grant yung patent documents for this. And then the last one is an industrial design. So a utility model is sort of like a minor invention because it doesn't have as strict requirements as patents. Mas lenient yung requirements ng law for utility models. And then patents have a very technical description, which I will break down later on para mas madali. And then industrial designs are essentially products that have aesthetic qualities to them. So for this umbrella, I think it's the tag at the side. So it's an umbrella. It's not a new invention. Pero siguro yung binago nila is yung kung gaano kaganda yung aesthetics niya. So since engineering students kayo, I think you'll understand these drawings more when you go through ES1. Parang there are a lot of technical drawings in patent application documents. And ayun, parang it's cool nga when you look at them because you see that ito yung front view, ito yung top view, which tinatake up talaga ng engineering. So these are the descriptions of these properties in law. This is the actual text of the law. So I highlighted the important words that you should remember for utility models. It just needs to be new and industrially applicable. So new meaning, novel, never been used before or hasn't been invented yet. And industrially applicable meaning pwede siyang gamitin sa companies. Pwede siya ma-manufacture. It can be applied to company processes. And then patents, this is a longer description because it's a more specific description. There are 3 requirements for a patent, which I will cite later on. If you read the law, it describes it as something new. It involves an inventive step and is industrially applicable. So if you compare utility models and patents, ano lang yung missing dyan? It's the phrase inventive step. So, kaya less stringent yung requirements ng UM kasi wala yung inventive step. And then lastly, industrial design, which is any composition of lines or colors or any 3-dimensional form. So, yun yung sinasabi ko sa ES1, may top view, front view. You need those to help you describe your industrial design to the IPO examiners, who will then determine whether or not mag-grant sila ng IP rights or IP documents for that. So, important yung distinction among these 3 kasi I think as MatE future engineers, you can actually create anything under these 3. So you need to know what kind of product that is. And then the benefits are different eh. For example, for utility models, 7 years lang yung term of protection for that, which means after 7 years, wala ka ng IP rights over it. People can use the design or the model that you created. Patents, it's a longer term. It's 20 years. So this is usually used by pharmaceutical companies, which is why some of their medicines are expensive. Most likely may patent over that. And then after 20 years, pwede na siya ma-mass produce, which makes it more affordable. And then industrial design, it's a term of 5 years, renewable for not more than 2 consecutive periods. So max 10 years. So pinakamahaba talaga yung patent. So if you want to remember them, it's easier to remember them by these 3 keywords. Utility models are minor inventions. They're not as strict as patents. Patents are the inventions like the light bulb or the iPhone or 3D printers or Bluetooth or self-driving cars. May patent din daw for that. And then lastly, aesthetic creations for industrial design. So if you look at the journals online, ito din yung benefit sa MatE. Since it's a pretty new field, innovative field, we have a lot of young inventors. And, journals are more accessible as compared to before. So I just searched nga sa Google for this eh. Sabi ko, are there any materials engineering patents? And then there are so many journals that list patents for materials engineers. And some of these patents are in the field of chemistry or biodegradable materials, composites. I understand that there's still a composites lab in MMM. So, yan, baka may mga patents sila, di ba? Hindi mo alam. You can ask them. But they create a lot of interesting stuff which are very, very much patentable. Nung nasa PMIL ako, parang si Doc Jong yung namin, advisor namin ni Nigel. And then we tried applying for a patent for our thesis, which is a nanocomposite spray for anti-corrosive properties. So there are actually opportunities for this as early as thesis level. So, and what is patentable? This is what I mentioned a while ago na we will break it down into 3 elements. So the 3 elements are, it must be new, it has to have an inventive step, and it has to be industrially applicable. So, pag new, di ba, dapat walang nakagawa dati. It should be novel. Parang it's innovative. That's the whole purpose of a patent. And then inventive step, meaning it solves it's not clear to someone who's skilled in MatE na ganito yung invention niya. So parang it shouldn't be, we have this term in law, it's called prior art. So it should be prior art. Prior art meaning parang in existence na siya. And then it shouldn't be obvious to a person who's skilled in the art, meaning if you're a MatE engineer and then you invent something, that inventive step shouldn't be clear to another materials engineer. Otherwise, mawawala yung second element. And then third, it's industrially applicable. Ayan, yan. Yung tetra, I asked Sir Ken if diniscuss niya yung tetrahedron, tas hindi pala, pero MatE 10 kasi namin yan dati. So, include ko siya. This is a very important for me.
Meron na sila niyan. Meron
na. Okay,
meron
good. Very important yan. As in, hanggang ngayon, naalala ko pa yan eh. So, ganun siya ka-important. I think in this tetrahedron, yung paggawa niya ng patents, kahit saan dyan eh, pwede. I mean, for example, if you just innovate as to the performance of something, pwede. Kasi there was a case in the Supreme Court where parang the guy invented tiles which were easier to put as opposed to normal tiles. And the Supreme Court said, protected yan. That's innovative. So, yan. Pwede. Marami possibilities. So, are there any F1 fans here? Kasi I'm gonna use F1 for my examples. So, for my first question, para mas madaling maintindihan, let's do it in a question and answer format. So, let's say, hinire ka ng Ferrari to be their head materials engineer. And then, you invented a ceramic ceramic wheel bearing, which is really actually a part of the car. And I saw a journal that is actually trying to invent something like this. So pwede. And ceramics is also a MatE subject, so very interesting. So let's say you invented it nga as a very magaling materials engineer. But then, parang hindi mo kasi alam na pwedeng ma-patent. You didn't know that there were IP rights that you could get as a materials engineer. And then you parang pinublish mo sa Facebook, sa stories mo sa IG, nilagay mo, ganito gumawa. This is how I invented my wheel-bearing advanced ceramic material. So the question is, if Red Bull copies that and uses it in their car, can you file for infringement? Can you file for damages for using your invention? So the answer is, oh yeah, you guys can answer before I answer. You guys can answer again. The answer is no, because, and very important rule again for IP rights, no patent, no infringement. So if you don't have the letters patent that's granted by the IPO, then you cannot file for infringement. So basically, in that situation, Red Bull can use the invention without being sued for infringement. So yun yung general rule. And then second question, what if sa pag-copy ng Red Bull, sila yung nag-apply for a patent? So dinisclose mo na, di ba? Parang nasa IG na. So syempre parang inassume mo na lahat ng teams gusto gamitin yung invention mo. because it will increase the car speed by 10 times, let's say. So what if si Red Bull, they were like, oh, I want to get a patent for this because for sure everyone will want to use it. Will it be granted? Is that possible? So the answer is that that's not possible anymore. Red Bull cannot get that patent document. Why? Because since you have already disclosed your patent to the public, it's no longer new. It's no longer novel. So what Red Bull did was it just got something old. It copied it. So it's nothing new eh. So parang they can't, wala yung isang element ng patent, which is novelty. That's why the patent cannot be granted. So in that case, Red Bull won't get the patent documents then. And then, so let's say you disclosed your invention in a conference. Parang, hey, this is what I invented. I'm so excited to share it with you. But then you applied for a patent within 1 year. Pwede ba yun? Are you still protected? So, you are, because there's a very specific time period and very specific exception in the law, which is called the non-prejudicial disclosure. So this means that when the inventor discloses his invention, but is able to apply for a patent within 12 months from such disclosure, then pwede pa rin mag-grant yung patent. It's called non-prejudicial eh. So, since you're the inventor, parang dapat, hindi siya prejudicial sa'yo na dinisclose mo eh. Because you were able to file within the time frame of 12 months. But very important, if you do not file within 12 months of your public disclosure, then wala nang protection yung law na it doesn't give you protection anymore. So, yeah, future inventors, please be wary of that period. And that's also the same period for international applications. So very iba yung rules for that. There's a treaty for that for global patents. And so 12 months. So another question. Very important concept. Let's say you, instead of inventing the mismong product, ang na-invent mo ay yung mathematical equation to parang increase the speed of the car, or the theory behind the aerodynamics that other scientists have not discovered. Can you patent that? Parang in your studies, you discovered na may ganito. Patentable ba yan? Eh, creation of the mind ko yun. The answer is no, because the law specifically says that one of the non-patentable creations are mathematical methods, theories, and equations. Can you imagine if, let's say, patentable nga yun? Siguro nakapatent na yung mga theories ni Albert Einstein or Ohm's law, yung mga ganyan. Kaya I think that's why the law carved out an exception, because we will need those theories in general applications, and it will be very cumbersome for everyone to pay royalties just to use those theories, those mathematical methods and equations. So, okay, last question. Let's say you use the same wheel bearing as the previous engineer, and then you said, but I made it look better. I made it look sleek, more aesthetically pleasing to Gen Z. Ayan, baka may naligay kang mga Gen Z elements, ganyan. Is it patentable? So the answer is no, because mere aesthetics, it's not a patentable thing. It can probably be an industrial application or industrial product. Pero for patents, not really. Patents, it's more of innovation and inventions. What if you were commissioned? This is a common thing, I think, for our time. Kasi parang maraming mining companies that wanted to finance the studies that we were doing. In my time, I think it was Oceana Gold that financed our nano silica project. So the question is, let's say yung Red Bull told you to create it. Parang you were hired just for that purpose, and they will pay you once you are able to create it. Will you still own the patent rights to your invention? Ikaw na-create nun. So, the general rule is, if somebody commissions you to create it, they will own the patent rights. The exception is, if nakalagay sa contract mo na sa'yo yon, that's your, whatever you create, the rights to that are yours. So very important to remember this in your future dealings. Let's say, ma-commission ka nga. You're a very brilliant MatE student who wants to create sustainable things. Important to look at that to see whether or not patent rights are really afforded to you. Also, another exception, not only is it an exception if it's in your contract, it's also an exception if you were able to invent it outside the course of your regular duties. So let's say you were hired as a janitor sa Red Bull. Janitor ka lang, pero sa off times mo, kaya mo mag-invent ng wheel bearing or some new engine for the car. Then that's yours. Patent mo yan because it's something that you created outside of your job. So what are you entitled to? There are 2 basic rights to any patent holder. So the first one is very, very important. This is really where businesses try to maintain their IP rights. It's in the right to restrain, prohibit, and prevent unauthorized use of their inventions. That is why a lot of companies try to hire the best engineers and scientists, because if they're able to create something new, that is something that's patentable. And once they get a patent, they have exclusive rights. It's kind of like a monopoly. You have a monopoly over that certain invention. So if you were the first one to create a hologram or like a composite material that is more durable than concrete, let's say, for example, that is very applicable in the Philippine setting, that can mean a lot to the growth of the business because you are able to prevent other people from creating the same thing. So once you prevent people from creating the same thing, bibili lang sa'yo yung mga tao. It's like esomeprazole. That's why it's very expensive. I think it's like 100 pesos compared to other medicines. And then this right also applies to processes. So you can also invent new ways of doing things or very innovative ways of coming up with the same result in manufacturing and in processing other goods. So this is a case study. I think this is a very recent patent issue between. So right now, I think companies are really transferring or making the move and switching to technological packers, for example. Those are packing machines, packing robots. So yeah, they will probably need a lot of new scientists, especially ako, sa tingin ko sa Philippines, we have a lot of opportunities to innovate. Kasi, for example, these types of machines, we don't see this a lot in companies now. So creating materials for this is it's an open field. Like, it's like stepping onto the moon. Who gets there first will get the best patent rights, IP rights for that. So in this case, in AutoStore versus Ocado, they have a patent, sort of a patent issue as to the invention of their cube storage automation machines, basically stacking boxes, machines. And this is a lot of, it's I think it's still ongoing. So when you engage in patent wars, it means that you have patents to your name, and you have the right to prohibit others from using it. So the original patent owner is trying to prevent others from using the same technology. Sometimes actually, if in some of the cases we've read, when there are infringement cases, sometimes the other party enters into a compromise agreement. So it's not always preventing others from using an invention. Sometimes it's letting others use it, but under certain conditions. So that's also a very economic standpoint, business standpoint for patents and inventions. So here, let's talk about MatE people in the legal industry. So I included a picture of my batchmates, mga 2012 MatE. If you guys have met Doc Les, nandyan siya sa gitna. That was our MatE 101 class, I think. And then we had a conference. So that's how I think hindi yata kami complete dyan. But in that picture, since we've taken that picture a few years ago, there are a lot of people in different fields. There are a lot of scientists, I think, who are taking masters abroad. And there are a lot of researchers, a lot of profs, professors sa UP. Yung isang batchmate ko dyan, si Glenson, I think he's teaching in LB. So there are a lot of fields that MatE students can aim to go into. But syempre, as currently as in the legal industry as a lawyer, I would encourage everyone to also consider taking up law, because it's a common misconception that since engineering ka, hindi ka bagay sa law. So I remember in my classes, every single law class, the first question would be, if I would say, I'm from BS Materials Engineering, UP Diliman, then they would be like, why? Why did you still go into law? That's a very common question. But surprisingly, in this field, especially in IP, there are a lot of engineers. I have met material science students here, and civil engineers are also here. Doctors, there are also doctors here. So the legal industry is a very wide and applicable industry for materials engineers. So far, I have read yung most ng jobs right now for IP is patent application. So we have filed patent applications, and you review abstract. If you guys are familiar with a thesis or a research study, there's abstract and then discussion, ganyan. Those are also the things that you need to pass for a patent application. So yeah, very applicable yung mga matututunan nyo sa MatE at sa law. And to be honest, one of the things that engineering teaches you, which is, I think very special about engineering, is it really teaches you to solve problems. So pag exams nyo, it's usually problem. Ikaw yung solution. So that's the same thing with law. You can apply both theoretical knowledge and everyday knowledge that you gain from engineering to the law practice. So generally, there are two types of practices. It's private and public. So for private practice, it's which is what I'm engaged in. So you can either join a firm, a law firm, or a consultancy firm, or there are also specific businesses, not necessarily law firms, but businesses that are engaged in IP rights. So in IP, there are a lot of engineers, there are a lot of those with a scientific background, mga Bachelor of Sciences, may mga bio, marami din. So it's a very, I guess, technical, scientific, and diverse field for us, for MatE. And then for public practice, MatE people also have opportunities here because, as I said a while ago, we have a very innovative government agency that deals with IP law, which is the Intellectual Property Office of the Philippines. So there are a lot of engineers there. I went to a talk held by IPOPHIL, and they mentioned that, we'd like to welcome all our legal guests, our engineers. So there are a lot of engineers that also engage in this practice. One of our employees was a patent examiner. And then if you have a scientific background, edge mo yun. If you guys are familiar with this is a Crocs, one of the most recent Crocs designs. Honestly, I haven't seen this yet sa Philippines, pero this is one of the clients we have, and we're trying to help them with their patent applications. So this is one of the things you can do as a lawyer. It's to assist in the application for patents. So when you apply for a patent, I think you really need a lawyer to sign at the end, because the lawyer helps you draft the required documents, because there are a lot of legal aspects that you need to consider when you file for a patent, because it's not only application that you need to think about, but also the filing fees and annual fees. So you have to maintain your IP rights. It's not enough to apply. It also has to be something you maintain throughout the 20-year period for patents. And then lastly, prosecution and litigation. So this is the field where you see a lot of TV series or movies depict yung mga nasa court, Suits, kung nanonood kayo ng Suits, or other law movies and series. Suits lang pinapanood ko eh. And How to Get Away with Murder. Si Annalise Keating. These are examples of lawyers who are engaged in litigation. So as an IP lawyer, you will also be engaged in this, but it's more, I guess, more on the technology side. So it's a bit technical, especially when it comes to patents. So as a MatE student, if you go into the legal practice and then you get into IP law, you will also experience prosecution and litigation for patent infringement or unfair competition. So yan, yung mga evidence gathering, and then trying to determine kung ginaya ba talaga, and then applying the law. How much damages will they get? Mga ganun. So yun yung pwede, applicable to MatE people. So this is a picture of IPOPHIL. Mukha siyang corporate building actually, but that's a government office. It's a very big government office. And there are a lot of engineers. Actually, you don't need to be a lawyer to be a patent examiner. So there are a lot of engineers who are patent examiners. They basically say that the documents of the patent can move on to the next step, can be hopefully approved after a few more steps. And then attorney 1 to 5, it's a government position. If you're an IP practitioner, you can practice privately and then go to a public office. And other careers, as I've said, maraming mga engineers dun. And broadly speaking, really, pwede ka rin maging legislator or lawmaker in the future. You know, you never know na congressman ka pala. Tapos, pwede ka mag-focus sa scientific field. In fact, you don't need to be a lawyer. Sometimes they have to consult with engineers when they're trying to craft a specific law. So when they are going to craft a law for innovation and science, they will most likely look for engineers in that field. And malay natin, pag nag-law ka, tapos naging judge ka, you can help with drafting decisions for IP issues, which will help also craft the law. So that ends my talk. If you have questions, I'm not sure if there were questions, I couldn't see, but thank you for listening. Have a good afternoon, and I hope the next speaker is also happy. Wala na akong masabi.
Thank you, Nicolette. We actually received questions, lots of questions na, pero we'll just entertain 2 questions and the rest we will just email it to you. Tapos i-relay na lang namin sa students yung ibang mga questions. So if there are other students who would like to add questions pa, please feel free to message us via chat box. Okay, so yung first question, as engineers and scientists, we want our inventions to reach communities or target demographics. However, do you feel that the IP law somehow hinders the immediate deployment of technologies?
That's a good question. But to me, as from what I'm seeing right now sa practice, parang in fact it encourages people to create something new. Parang instead of nagsisettle yung mga tao sa ganito, kasi this is what works. Parang they are trying to look for ways to create something else para makuha nila yung IP rights. So, it's like an incentive to create more. So, since there are incentives, more people are pushed to create. As opposed to, let's say, parang walang IP rights. Parang tanggalin natin lahat. It's hard to show people the benefits that they will get when they create something. So, at least, since it's there in the law, alam ng mga tao na, ito yung makukuha ko pag nagawa ko to.
Okay, thank you. So, another question is, if the patent, ito na lang pala. Ito palang question na to ay kaya namin sagutin sa klase kasi for the students to nung file sa UP.
Sure.
Okay. Anyway, ito na lang. The most common question na na-receive mo. Okay, so why did you choose to take up law after obtaining materials engineering degree?
Ito yung isasagot ko na lang sa inyo yung sinasabi ko sa profs ko sa law school. Sabi ko sa kanila, I chose to take up law because I believe that pwede mo siya i-combine in some way. So I'm still looking for ways to combine it, but really I'm trying to focus on helping startups and innovators create a business and at the same time protect those rights. Kasi usually what happens is big companies notice na, parang promising to, kunin ko yan. But ako, I want to help develop the Filipino and scientist parang realm, parang, innovate. Kaya sobrang amazing yung yung nakita kong isang startup na bamboo construction material na composite. Super amazing. And it's a very local business. It's a Filipino group. Kaya very promising yung field. There's a lot that we can do. And that's why I thought about taking up law because I wanted to help us materials engineers in that way so that it's more accessible to us.
Thank you. Feeling ko maraming estudyante ngayon ang ma-entice no i-consider ang law after graduating business.
Yeah, you guys can message me.
Okay, so let us just give you this appreciation certificate of appreciation. Okay, so this certificate of appreciation is awarded to Attorney Nicolette S. Malferrari for sharing her knowledge and expertise as a resource speaker in a special lecture of MatE 15, Principles of Materials Engineering Practice, entitled Policies on Intellectual Property in the Philippines. So given on this 27th of July via Zoom platform of the University of the Philippines, Diliman, Quezon City. So signed by the 3 of us, yung MatE 15 handlers.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invite. I had so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
So
Nikki.
if may questions tayo to Attorney Nikki, feel free lang to message us. We will relay that to her. And i-relay na lang ulit namin on our next session yung mga sagot ni Attorney Nikki.
I'd like to ask, Nikki, do you entertain questions directly to you?
Yeah,
Pwedeng
sure.
mag-prepare ng email na pwedeng sendan ng mga
Yeah,
participants natin.
pwede. You can give them my email para they can email me if they want.
Okay.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Sa chat box siguro yung email. Yeah. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you. Okay, so moving to our next topic. Okay, so our next guest speaker is Dr. Elia Di Clemente, or mas kilala natin siya as Doc Bebeng. Okay, so she's a professor at the Department of Mining, Metallurgical and Materials Engineering, okay, and the current college secretary of the College of Engineering. And she's an affiliate of environmental and energy engineering programs. So she's currently active in the environmental engineering field, focusing on environmental problems in the mining and mineral processing industry. Okay, so Dr. Bebeng also finished her undergraduate and graduate course in our department, okay, and has been teaching MatE, EM, MSE, and MA courses since she started teaching in the year 2000 after having been employed as the university research assistant. Her background in materials characterization was founded on her experience with Austria Mineral Laboratories Incorporated under the mentorship of Dr. Antonio M. Austria, a renowned MetE practitioner in the Philippines. She was awarded as the most outstanding MetE alumna for 2019 by the UP Alumni Engineers and the UPAA Outstanding Education Innovation Award for 2022. So she has been the holder of the Semirara Mining Professorial Chair for Longwall Mining since 2019. So let us all welcome Dr. Elia Di Clemente. Hi, Doc Bebeng.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Ako na, Doc Beng, mag-share ng PowerPoint niyo.
Hindi na yung MetNet ko eh.
Sige po, no problem, Doc. Okay. Skip
Okay.
po, Doc.
Okay, so this afternoon, we will look at OSH and HIRAC. And I believe all of you know that they are in a relationship. O, diba? Kasi, first of all, si OSH ay very dependent on HIRAC. Kasi siya yung nagbubuo nung kailangan gawin para sa OSH. Okay? So let's start out with OSH. This is a multidisciplinary field, of course, concerned with the health, safety, as well as the welfare of people, especially at the workplace. Okay? So ang problema kay OSH, this is a law which is established in order to protect the people who are working. No? So hindi siya pwedeng hindi pansinin kasi kailangan siya para ma-maintain mo yung welfare ng mga tao. No? So unfortunately, hindi kasama dito yung tenure. Yung tenure meaning pag pumasok ka na matagal ka na sa kumpanya, meron kang safety na hindi ka natatanggalin. No? So lalo na sa private companies, they have their own rules and regulations. Basta following the labor code, you cannot do anything about it. Okay? So let's look at the workplace. Yung workplace mo refers to the areas where people are required to do their duties and responsibilities. Okay. As soon as you enter the area, so kunyari yung building nyo ay merong malaking grounds for parking. Doon pa lang sa pagpasok mo ng parking space, that is already part of your workplace. So kung meron ka naging aksidente doon sa area na yon, cargo ka pa rin ng kumpanya. Okay? And it includes all areas of the factory or the manufacturing plant, including offices, canteens, and all other even rest areas. Okay? So now we look at the hazards. Paano nag-a-affect ngayon si HIRAC dito? Okay. So before we go to HIRAC, let's look at hazards. Okay. There are several types of hazards which you can encounter. So the first one, yung biological hazards na sinasabi natin, they can be viruses, bacteria, modes, insects, animals. So anything concerning biology, nandyan yan papasok. No? So biological are blood-borne diseases that can be transmitted through bodily fluids, yung mga viruses natin, yung bacteria natin. So these are some some of the examples which I took from the internet para makita nyo yung itsura nitong mga ng viruses and bacteria na to. These are modes, yun nandito. Tapos itong mga to yung mga bacteria natin nasa right side mo, itong mga bilog-bilog na green, and this yellow and white thing, mga virus yan. And then the other side, ito yung mga bacteria natin, ano? And then we have what we call the physical hazards. Physical hazards natin are environmental factors which can harm one without even touching. Electricity, number one. The presence of electrical or live wires near wet surfaces ang unang-unang malaking problema ng mga tao sa workplace. Okay? And then you have fires, because fires may cause burns, asphyxiation, and fatalities. And then you have the confined spaces, which may result in suffocation. And extreme temperatures are sometimes the causes of serious health impacts. Okay? So the next slide will show us some of these examples. Ito, familiar kayo, yan, medyo hindi maganda yung pagkaka-set up niya nung hagdanan niya, nahulog siya. So, yan yung mga physical hazards na sinasabi natin. Ito naman, nabuhusan na ng tubig yung mga bata, no? So, let's look now at chemical hazards. These chemical hazards may not be immediately identifiable, and it may cause long-term harm, meaning as soon as you are exposed, hindi mo kaagad alam na na-expose ka na dun sa hazard, no? So, ito ang problema kay chemical hazard, they may be ordinary chemicals such as cleaning chemicals. And these cleaning chemicals can cause allergic reactions and skin irritations. Halimbawa, bleach, you know the bleach, no? Kailangan mong paputiin yung mancha, alisin yung mancha doon sa damit. Ginagamit natin to sa laundry, no? So most of the time sa factory, ginagamit yan pang disinfect and panglinis din again, no? So if you hold the bleach with your uncovered hands, makikita mo after a while namumuti na siya. Nagda-dry na yung hands mo, no? So imaginein mo yung strength ng bleach na ginagamit mo sa household sometimes are very light compared to the strength of the bleach being used in manufacturing companies. Kasi tatanggalin dito mga grasa, no, yung mga hard to remove na materials. Okay, so primers, paints, welding, fumes, and other hazards are also caused by chemicals, and these have to be identified. Okay, next slide, please. The next slide shows us ito, itsura niya. So ito, one of the things which you have to be careful with when you're in the factory, yan, pag nag-mix ka ng chemicals mo, hindi mo napapansin na meron kang fumes na hindi lang ikaw yung nakaka-inhale, but also the other people together with you in the room, no? So you have to be careful about that. Okay? And then the next slide shows us the safety hazards naman. Okay. These are hazards that create unsafe working conditions. Like you have trailing power cords, meron kang loose or frayed carpets and rugs, minsan ice and water spills, lalo na yung nasa may drinking fountain ka, pagka may kumuha ng tubig, natapon ng konti, hindi pinapansin, no? So yung mga ganon, kailangan you will watch out for it kasi pwedeng madulas ka, ordinarily wala kang problema, pero what if nadulas ka na medyo bumagsak yung ulo mo, tumama kung saan, so medyo delikado na, no? So kaya safety hazard talaga siya. And then again, unguarded moving machinery. These are machineries which may contain, halimbawa, yung trolley mo, no? Meron kang pinatong doon, tapos may ginawa ka sandali, nakalimutan mong ilak yung kanyang gulong, and gumulong siya, baka may mabangga, may tamaan na chemical na bumagsak or something, na. So you have to be careful about that. And then of course, yung frayed and faulty cords mo, tsaka wirings and cables na nakausli. Okay, so the next slide shows us a bit of this hazards which we may be able to encounter. Yan, nakita mo. yung slippery area, tapos yung nakalalabas na mga cords. Ito yung mga common hazards na hindi natin halos pinapansin. Even in our house, di ba? Sa bahay natin mismo, makikita nyo yung mga cord na nakakabit sa mga extension, tapos yung extension mo nakaharang dyan, hindi natin masyadong pinapansin. But in the factory, that is a very bad practice. Kasi hindi lang kayo yung pwedeng maapektuhan, but also others who may be passing by. No? So, and then we have what we call the ergonomic hazards. Next slide, please. The ergonomic hazards are caused by poor physical factors, and it may result in problems with your musculoskeletal system. Okay. Ano to, yung mga muscles mo, yung bones mo, pwede maapektuhan. No? This include heavy lifting, kung wrong yung technique mo, it may cause back pain. Even the positioning of your chair or how you sit in your chair is an ergonomic hazard. So if your chair is not ergonomically designed, may possibility na when you rise up after a long day's work, masakit yung mga balakang mo. No? So that's part of what we call an ergonomic hazard kasi hindi ka pwedeng araw-araw na pumapasok ka 5 times a week or 6 times a week if necessary, na everyday ganun yung magiging feeling mo. Kasi in the end, hanggang natapos ka na magtrabaho, nag-retire ka na, saka mo mararamdaman ngayon na ayaw nang bumalik sa dati yung iyong hips dahil na problema ka na dun sa ergonomic hazard na na-expose ka. Okay? So long-term exposure again to display screen equipment. Like now, we're looking at the computer, you're doing your assignments and your lectures in the computer. So this is also a hazard. You're already being exposed to the display screen mo. So it's very important that you have something to prevent the UV light from affecting you. No? So sometimes you may be feeling nauseous or masakit na ang ulo mo pagdating ng hapon. Yan yung exposure mo, yun yung nagkakos niyan. Ano? And then the long-term use of vibrating tools can cause sensory nerve damage or even carpal tunnel syndrome. Kasi parang kung nagva-vibrate yung tool mo, na hawak mo, ang tendency mo, ipe-prevent mo yung vibration, di ba? Kaya ka nagkakaroon ng carpal tunnel syndrome. Kasi yung carpal tunnels mo na nakakonect dun sa mga kamay natin, sila yung na-stress. Okay? So let's look at the picture. Yan. So ito lang, working on a desk, you can have a lot of problems kung hindi maganda yung pagkaka-design mo ng yung upuan. Okay? So even the feet should be flat down when you're sitting. No? Hindi pwedeng naka-elevate ka kasi yung weight mo, yung weight nung body mo, sometimes na focus dun sa bottom nung feet mo, no? So kahit na hindi nakalapat yung paa mo, parang kinikerry niya yung weight, may gravity ka so bumababa yung feet mo nang hindi nagta-touch, siya yung nasa stress na yon. Okay? So mostly yung neck and shoulders yan kasama sa mga naapektuhan. And then your back muscles, and the hips kasama dyan. Okay? So ito yung sa carrying heavy loads, no? Kailangan alam mo kung paano mo siya bubuhatin para hindi ka masyadong masa-stress. Okay? Next slide, please. Ito ngayon yung pinakamasaya, yung psychosocial hazards. Hindi siya masyadong evident kasi yung health impacts ang nakikita mo. And sometimes yung health impact nito nai-impact yung overall well-being ng tao. So yung psychosocial includes yung harassment mo. You have bullying, sexual harassment, etc., which can cause humiliation and distress. And workplace aggression and abuse, whether from a client, a colleague, or someone else, can cause serious effects on someone's mental health and well-being. Okay? So if you see the next slide, I have some examples here. Itong first photo natin sa taas, palagi nating sinasabi, the customer is always right. Pero kung ikaw yung bear ng brand ng customer, hindi siya maganda sa well-being mo. This is a big problem, particularly with our call centers, no? So yung mga call centers natin na based in the US probably, no? Or sometimes na nagre-receive ng mga complaints. The whole day, puro complaint lang naririnig nila. Kahit na hindi nila pinakikialaman at nire-report lang kung ano yung complaint and then to transfer to a technical guy, it's still very stressing to hear people grieving or griping about their problems, no? So, kahit ikaw lang maririnig mo, may magkukwento sa'yo ng ganito. Tapos, hindi ka naman involved, pero naririnig mo yung problema niya. Sometimes it gets into you, di ba? Ano ba naman gagawa ko para matulungan ko to? And then the whole day, minsan hanggang gabi na dinadala mo sa bahay mo, paano ko ba tutulungan tong taon to? So, pinoproblema mo din siya, no? So this is very particularly problematic. Ito, meron kang boss na masungit, sigaw ng sigaw, kinagagalitan ka. So it gets into you then, di ba? Parang mental health mo na yung na-affectuhan niya. So in this slide dito sa baba, ito yung sinasabi natin bullying naman. No? Okay, so after looking at these hazards, let's now look at hazards identification. Ito na si HIRAC. Dito na papasok. No? So, okay, the next slide tells us what hazard identification is. Identification, very easy to understand. It's the processes of examining your work area and the work task for the purpose of identifying all the hazards which are inherent in your job. And this process is about finding out which area of the work or task could cause harm to you. Okay? So it's not easy to identify kasi sometimes hindi naman ganun ka evident na meron kang hazard na encounter, no? So, next slide, please. Risk assessment naman is actually reviewing your workplace and looking at the nature of the hazards. So you assess all materials, all situations, and even policies, which may be the cause for the presence of the hazard. And then you prepare a risk assessment report. It's very easy to prepare a risk assessment report if your identification of the hazard is very comprehensive, no? So I always tell my students when we're discussing risk identification, hazard identification, mas maganda na mag-identify ng hazard kung ang taong nag-identify ay medyo praning, no? Para very conscious ka na baka may mangyaring ganito, baka may mangyari. Yun yung mga magagandang tao na ilagay dyan sa hazard identification. Kasi lahat ng bagay, kahit na small things, nakikita nila na may probability na magkaroon ng problema dun sa workplace mo. It's very important that you identify it and list it down. So tapos later, dun sa identification mo, i-assess mo na yun siya. Dun sa assessment ngayon, i-review ngayon, hindi na lang siya ang magre-review, kundi may kasama siya dun sa team na nagre-review ng assessment mo, no? Ng hazards na nilagay mo or the risks which may stem from the hazards which have been identified. And then the last part is your controls. Okay. So based on the risk assessment prepared, mag-a-assign ka ngayon ng priorities. Kasi alin ang most important, alin ang most grabe doon sa hazards mo. So later we will talk about the controls. And you use control measures para makontrol mo tong risk na to. Introduce the control measures to minimize the risks. And finally, you have to train your employees on any procedural policies which need to be changed. This is very important kasi sometimes hindi dun sa condition, hindi sa situation yung problema, kundi dun sa the way you listed out the procedure or the policies na kailangan nilang sundin doon ka nagkakaroon ng problema. Kaya sometimes in your team na nagkakaroon ka ng assessment, part of your assessment team should be able to tell which policies may be problematic. Okay? So next slide, managing risks. When you try to manage your risk, you have to have your management commitment. Okay, so there are 4 important steps which are usually done in managing your risks. Again, we discussed identification ng hazard, assessment ng risk, then control ng risk. And the 4 steps, the 4th step mo will involve reviewing the control measures which you have set for the hazard. Okay? Bakit kailangan ng management commitment? Kasi in all of these steps, you will be looking at problems which may be encountered in your company, and these problems have to have solutions which will entail financial costs. Or kung hindi man financial cost, changes in procedure. No? Kung changes in procedure, secondary lang yung cost kasi nag-change kang procedure, pwedeng nag-stop ka na ng production dahil kailangan change ng this procedure. So yung lag na yon, may economic benefit na nawala doon sa kumpanya. No? So hindi direct pero ando doon pa rin. So everything boils down to financial. Kaya kailangan commitment ni management. Kasi baka pwedeng mauna na silang magsabi na okay, kung gagawa kayong control measures, hindi pwedeng magpalit ng procedures kasi nandito na nakaset na yung equipment natin. So, wala ka nang gagawin sa equipment. Titignan mo na lang kung paano siya aayusin para hindi siya nakaka-cause ng harm. Kasi merong instances na baka kailangan mong palitan yung equipment kasi kinakain yung ano ba example mo. Halimbawa lang yung sa mga trash compactors natin. These are household items which you install in your sink. Tapos lahat nung solid na dumi, pag naglinis ka ng plato, nanghugas ka, pupunta doon, kinakain niya yan, dinudurog niya yan para maging liquid yung lalabas. And then pwede mo nang isama sa drain, sa piping system. No? Ang problema nito, pagka huhugas ka ng kamay na nakakurbata ka, kinakain niya yung kurbata, so mahihila ka. Pati ikaw sasama. No? Medyo malakas yung makina nito. No? So that's a very high risk equipment. No? So what you can do is install a lower type of equipment na ang kukunin lang niya talaga yung nasa drain na. So nandoon yung mag-change ka, meaning tanggalin mo yung luma o maglalagay ka ng bago. Okay? So, yung cost na yun will have to be agreed to with your management. So, kung ikaw yung nagre-recommenda, hindi pwedeng magre-recommenda ka ng something na hindi sila mag-a-agree. Kasi hindi mo ma-address yung problema. No? May iwan yung risk na nandoon pa rin. Okay? So we move on to risk assessment. When you talk about risk assessment, next slide please, you are evaluating the risk associated with the hazards which have been identified so that the nature of the risk can be understood. Okay? It's very important you understand kung ano yung nagko-cause ng risk. Okay? Hindi lang na-identify siya, kundi naintindihan mo para madali mo siyang makontrol. Okay? So, this includes the nature of the harm that may result from the hazard and the severity of the harm as well as the likelihood of its occurring. Sa occurrence niya, kung is it likely to occur or it's not likely, very rare, everything will have to be taken into consideration. And then, yung after assessing, titingnan mo na yung controls. This now takes actions to eliminate the health and safety risks which are present, and you do this, your action should be as far as reasonably practical. No? Hindi pwede yung suntok sa buwan yung yung control na gagawin mo. Kailangan everybody handhold dyan at lahat kayo agree na ganito yung gagawin natin. Okay. So where risks cannot be eliminated, then implementation of control measures is required to minimize your risk. So yung controls mo, meron din siyang hierarchy of controls na kailangan mong i-develop. Okay? So let's look at the steps one by one. First, you identify the hazard. The hazard can be identified by looking at where. What is the situation that may cause harm? Saan ba siya? Sa physical work environment? Sa equipment ba siya? Sa work task no? Sa design or management of the work? So yun titignan mo. And yung isa is, the next slide please, the how. Ano ang nangyari? Bakit nangyari yan? So you look at past incidents to examine what happened and whether the incident will occur again. Kung paulit-ulit, kailangan i-address mo na siya kaagad. So kung bibihira, nandun siya sa dulo. So dun tayo sa hierarchy later, we will discuss. And the employees have to be consulted to find out what they consider as safety issues. Okay. Hindi pwedeng management lang ang magde-determine. Kasi si management, hindi naman siya yung nagtatrabaho dun sa area, di ba? Andyan si employee, siya yung naka-expose doon day in and day out. So you have to consult them kasi sila yung nakakaalam kung ano ba yung safety issues na makaka-apekto sa kanila. Work areas or work site to be inspected are examined to find out what is happening at the moment. This is quite important kasi sometimes, when you have a work program na naka-lista dyan, sometimes dun sa baba, hindi siya yung sinusunod kasi may natutunang shortcut si employee para mabilis yung trabaho niya, ganito yung gagawin, no? Kaya yung inspection mo and examining should be done on the ground. Okay? So bukod doon sa pagkukwento ng employee sa'yo, nagkonsulta ka sa kanya, titignan mo kung ano yung nangyayari. Kasi sometimes, again, yung employees tend to tell you what is in the manual kasi yun yung required sa kanila. Pero when you look at how they're working, meron kang makikita na meron silang ginagawa a little bit of shortcuts. Okay? And then information about your equipment and your safety data sheets should be reviewed. Yung materia MSDS na sinatawag natin, hindi siya nandiyan para lang sumama sa chemicals. Nandiyan siya para makita mo kung ano yung safety na pwede mo ma-encounter, safety problems na pwede mo ma-encounter while you are handling those chemicals. Okay? And then, ito very important again, creative thinking on what may occur and the gravity of any occurrence is very much welcome when you're looking at the how. Okay? Next one is the assessment of the risk. Ito na yan. Yung assessment mo will involve the consideration of someone being exposed to a hazard and the likelihood of it occurring. So determine how severe the risk is and whether any existing control measures are effective. Because sometimes maglalagay ka ng control measure pero hindi naman pinapansin. So alam mo na yung effectivity niya is very low, di ba? So what actions should be taken to control the risk and how urgent these actions need to be taken. Okay, next slide. Other risk factors to be considered include the work premises and the working environment, including the layout and the conditions. So it's very important, particularly if you're planning something involving several steps at a time. Mahirap yung ginagawa mo yung step 1 dito sa left side, tapos kailangan pumunta ka doon sa right side para sa step 2, tapos kailangan pumunta ka sa north para doon sa step 3. Babalik ka dito sa right side again for the step 4 para kung marami kayong nagtatrabaho, makakapalit-palitan kayo ng mukha dahil sa pagpalilipat-lipat ninyo ng posisyon, no? So kung pwedeng isang line Kaya meron tayong line usually sa manufacturing eh. Pagdating dito, punta ka sa linya, sa susunod na station, another person will be assigned. So yung linya mo, tuloy-tuloy lang. Hindi kayo magkakabanggaan during the work, no? And then the capability, skill, experience, and age of people ordinarily undertaking the work is also considered. Okay. Ito nakakatuwa kasi syempre, as all of you know, kayo mga bata pa kayo, no? So pag matatanda na kagaya ko, na matagal ka na doon sa kumpanya, your capability and your experience are vast already. So you would have developed the skill for undertaking the work, di ba? Okay. If you are a young supervisor and you go to an area where you have a person who is of a higher of a bigger numbered age, no? Kunyari, dumating ka sa kumpanya, pumasok ka, 2 taon ka pa lang, naging supervisor ka na. Tapos meron diyang mga tawag dito, workers na 30 years na sa kumpanya, pero ando doon pa rin siya sa baba kasi wala siyang BS or high school graduate lang siya or talagang yun yung ginagawa niyang trabaho. Okay. Ito ang malaking problema, mahirap turuan yung mga ganung tao kasi ang thinking nila, 10 taon na ako dito, 15 taon na ako dito, marunong ka pa sa akin. Parang ganon, di ba? So ito yung a little bit worrisome kasi hindi mo na kino-consider yung pinag-usapan natin kanina sa taas, kundi personal man, no? How do you convince this person how to change? Yun na yung magiging control mo. Kasi sometimes these are the people who are hard to convince na magpalit ng procedure. So if your controls will entail changes in the way things are being conducted, medyo mahihirapan ka ng konti. So you have to take that into consideration as well. Okay? And then, of course, the systems of work being used and the range of reasonably foreseeable conditions. Kasi the future conditions may change. So kung nakikita mo lilipat tayo sa ganitong area, lalaki area natin, kasama yan doon sa mga pag-assess mo ng risk factors mo. Okay? So the next slide, please. Pakita naman dito are the exposure factors which you need to consider. Are there any risk factors that increase the likelihood of exposure? How often is the person being exposed? How long is the person being exposed? How many people are exposed? What is the likely dose of exposure? Ito usually for the chemicals, no? What is the dose of exposure per person? And legislation. Are there legislated or recommended exposure levels required by statutory authorities? Okay. In this part, andito yung IRRs or laws or memos na manggagaling sa DENR, sa DOLE, sa all of the government agencies which may be connected to what you are doing. Lahat ng regulations and legislations kailangan pag-aralan nyo na kailangan nyo sundin. Okay? So may mga limits yan. Yung exposure mo ng person can be, kasi nasa workplace ka, halimbawa, nagwe-welding ka, dun sa workplace mo, hindi lang ikaw yung na-expose dun sa mga risks na nandun sa welding, di ba? Like nakikita mo yung mga spark na lumilipad, kung nandun ka sa area within the vicinity, pati ikaw na-expose dun sa rays nung sparks na yon, no? So although protected yung gumagawa, naka-mask siya, naka-welding mask siya, ikaw na dumadaan or nandun ka lang sa malapit sa kanya naka-estasyon, na-expose ka rin without you feeling the direct impact, no? Pero na-assume mo or nakukonsume mo din yung impact niya. So after a long exposure, kahit na mababa yung dosage, nararamdaman mo na. after the end of the week, masakit na yung mata mo kasi the whole week nandun siya, the whole day nagwe-welding. No? So, hindi mo kaagad ma-associate dun sa welding kasi sasabihin mo, ang layo ko naman doon. Bakit ako maaapektuhan? Pero, yun yung probable na naging cause ng exposure mo. So, in this case, kailangan i-address mo yung talagang nagwe-welding mismo, paano mo siya mahihiwalay dun sa mga ibang tao na pwedeng ma-expose. Okay? So next one is yung category table na tinatawag natin. So when you make your assessment of risk, you need to prepare a risk category table. And this is initially done para makita nyo kung alin yung uunahin. The table basically lists the areas in the place being assessed, and all areas are identified and described in detail. For example, in a laboratory area, meron kang storage of chemicals, storage of water, yung soil condition, air contamination, chemical spillage. So marami kang mailalagay na conditions na nandiyan dyan. And each of that, let's look at the next slide, please. Gagawin siya ng category table na ganito. You look at the likelihood as well as the consequences. You have to decide whether likely siya o very rare siya na mangyayari, pero pwedeng mangyari. Okay? Yung unlikely, pwedeng mangyari, pero dahil meron na akong ganito in place, malamang hindi mangyayari yan. No? So parang meron kang medyo positive na outlook na pwede siyang mangyari, pero yung possibility mangyari siya, very unlikely. Okay? And then, of course, possible, and then very likely and certain na mangyayari. So, yung likelihood mo is just the first rung. Yung second rung mo, yung consequences. Kasi ito yung mas mag-a-affect dun sa tao. Okay? What are the consequences? The worst is yung catastrophic. Catastrophic kasi pwedeng may mamatay. Okay? Pwedeng may mamatay. And kaya sinasabi natin critical, it has to be addressed kaagad. Okay? And then major, let's look at the next slide. I think I have, okay. How severely could someone be hurt? Okay, ito yung consequences natin. When you talk about catastrophic, you can have death or sometimes permanent disability. Talagang grabe na, no? And then major, kung you have a serious injury and it will be requiring hospital treatment. So, after the hospital treatment, baka i-require ka pa na mag-rest and huwag ka muna magtrabaho for some time. Ito yung mga major injuries na sinasabi. Kung moderate lang, you have medical treatment will be required, and sometimes you have some lost time. Lost time dahil umalis ka sa trabaho mo, kaya kailangan i-treat somewhere, tapos sabihin sa'yo, pahinga ka bukas, balik ka na next day. Okay na yan. So moderate lang tawag mo doon. And then minor injury, first aid lang yung required mo. Okay. So first aid meaning band-aid, lalagyan mo, or sometimes lalagyan mo lang ng burn ointment. Very slight lang yung burn mo. Burn ointment, sige, go back to work ka na. So wala kang downtime. And then insignificant are injuries requiring no treatment or first aid. Ito yung mga injuries na parang sa bata ay kikis lang ni mami tapos na okay na yan, hindi na yan masakit. Okay na yan. Yung insignificant na tinatawag. So in your table, ito yung nasa baba na medyo light lang yung colors niya. Okay? And then, itong very low, very low. Yan yun. Yung likelihood niya. Very, okay, so now we go to the likelihood. Okay. Yung likelihood mo, ang conditions niya, certain to occur. So it will be expected to occur in most circumstances. Yung very likely, pwedeng mangyari, pero I do not expect it. But it can, or it will probably occur in most circumstances. And if possible, it might occur occasionally. Unlikely, it could happen sometimes. And yung pinaka-rare mo is may happen only in exceptional circumstances. So, pwede kang makaksidente kasi tatanga-tanga ka lang. So, very highly unlikely na magkakaroon ka doon. Kaya sinabi mong rare kasi very highly unlikely na tatanga-tanga ka doon sa trabahohan mo. Diba? So, yan, konti lang incidences na ganyan. Okay. So, we look at the actions required in the next slide. Okay. If you have a critical rating, kailangan mo ng immediate action. Kasi critical nga, again, catastrophic, di ba? Or it may cause permanent disability. So, the access to the hazard should be restricted immediately until the risk can be lowered to an acceptable level. The short-term action may be required to lower the risk level, and then medium and long-term plans can be put in place to control the risk to as low as reasonably practicable using the hierarchy of controls. So sometimes kasi it's very highly unlikely na ma-address mo kaagad yung situation kung critical yung rating mo. So yung hazard mo may be something which cannot be addressed immediately. So kaya ang kailangan mo lang kaagad na gawin ay i-restrict mo yung pagpunta dun sa area or parang i-cordon off mo yung area. Tapos short-term action mo, how do you lower the risk level? Kailangan mo pag-isipan yun. Kasi most of the time, kung critical yan, kailangan ng overhaul nung area or nung process or nung nag-cause nitong risk na to. Kailangan pag-isipan mabuti. So sometimes it takes months to be able to address dyan. Ano? Hindi siya immediate talaga. Okay, the next one, kung high risk ka, meron kang quick action, usually between 1 to 2 days na address mo na. So the task should not proceed unless the risk has been assessed and control options have been selected based on the hierarchy of controls. Yung moderate naman na risk mo, the action can be done within a week para ma-eliminate or ma-minimize mo yung risk mo. So hindi kailangan madaliin kasi hindi naman masyadong critical yung kanyang effect. No? The next one, yung low risk mo, the action required within a reasonable time frame, usually 2 to 4 weeks para ma-eliminate mo or ma-minimize mo yung risk. And kung very low risk, it can be lowered or eliminated kung kailan pwede gawin. So talagang very low lang yung risk mo. So hindi siya ganun ka-critical. Pwede mo siyang ilagay sa dulo ng listahan. Pag nagawa mo na yung iba, saka mo siya tignan. Okay? And then controlling risk. This is your step 3 na, no? Next slide, please. Once the risk rating is determined, each hazard must have an existing control measure evaluated using the evaluation control effectiveness table para meron ka additional requirements na pwedeng pag-isipan. Okay? Okay, teka lang. Let me go back to the table. No? Yung table natin na nakita natin kanina, meron kang naka-associate na numbers dyan. Yung numbers are not hard and fast. No? Pwedeng 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 kung rare, 2 kung unlikely, 3 yung possible, and so on. And 5 yung catastrophic, 4 yung major, ganyan. Pwede ka mag-set ng numbers. Yung numbers mo are any numbers which you want to think of. So kung you think between catastrophic and major, medyo malaki yung tatlong, pwede mong gawin yun. Kung significant, 0 ka dyan, or probably 1. Yung minor mo pwedeng 5, yung moderate mo nasa 10 ka na, major mo nasa 30 ka na, so yung catastrophic mo nasa 50 ka na, pwede mong setan yung numbers. And then ganun din sa rare or unlikely, no? And then the number in your areas where you have the moderate, high, etc., you can put the number there by multiplying the number for the rare and the catastrophic. So yung pinaka-table mo will have these portions in numbers instead of nakasulat na moderate. Yung part na yan, numbers ang makikita mo. So now when you have the numbers, let's go back to the action, control, effectiveness. Ito, dun sa effectiveness of evaluation of controls. Bago mo siya ma-evaluate, titignan mo kasi yung risk table na yun, ano? And then, ililinya mo siya from the highest to the lowest. So, makikita mo doon kung ano yung kailangan i-address ka agad, kung alin yung pwedeng maghintay, kung alin yung pwedeng doon nga nasa bottom of the list. So, pwede mo na yan, ba? And then, when you put in place your controls, you have to monitor or evaluate the control effectiveness using this table. This table will tell you kung well-designed yung control mo and effectively implemented. Okay, and yun na. Hindi siya or i-evaluate mo yung control mo kung tama ba yung pagkakadesign mo at kung efficient ba or effective yung pagkaka-implement. Okay. So, usually, ang significance nito, pagka nandun ka sa well-designed, madali siyang i-rate kasi ikaw yung gumawa eh. So, makikita mo na, strong naman pala yung aking ginawang design na pag-control kasi nawala yung problem or enough na siya kasi kumonte yung incidences. Pero kung ganun pa rin kadami, it needs improvement na. Okay? So ito yung hierarchy mo for the well-design. Pero dun sa implementation, iba na to kasi tinitignan mo na dito ay yung mga tao na mag-i-implement ng controls na na-design mo. So, meaning, these are already out of your control. Sila na yan, sinabi mo na ito ang gawin mo. And if it is well-designed and nakikita mo na ginagawa, you know that it is effective. Okay? Even if it is well-designed pero nakikita mo na hindi ginagawa, walang nangyayari, nandun ka sa margin na sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't. Okay? So kung strong yon and still walang nangyayari, ibig sabihin, hindi ka agad na-implement or may deficiency ka doon sa implementation. Okay? Okay. Next slide. Review. Okay. Kung nakita nyo doon sa implementation na walang nangyayari, you have to implement additional risk controls. So you need to review and having identified your hazards and assess the risk, i-review nyo yung controls. So, na-manage ba? Wala nang apektuhan? Ano bang nangyari na? Okay na ba siya? Meron pang damage to our plant or the property or even the environment? Nandyan yan sa review mo. The management of the risk in the workplace requires its elimination so far as is reasonably practicable. So, kung hindi possible yung elimination, then minimization ang kailangan mong gawin. Kaya meron kang levels ng controls mo. No? So, all hazards which have been assessed should be dealt with in order of priority. So, very critical yung risk assessment kasi doon nakasalalay yung gagawin mo pag-assess or pag-control ng risk na na-encounter ng mga tao. So yung risk natin na control, meron kang levels. Level 1, 2, and 3. Level 1, eliminates your hazard. Next slide, please. Eliminates your hazards and associated risks. Next slide, please. By removing the hazard or selecting alternate products or equipment. Okay? Kung level 1 ka pa, yung hazard mo cannot be eliminated, yung risk mo can be minimized by lower control measures. Okay? Doon sa level 2 naman, substitutein mo na yung hazard, whether it's a substance, a method, or material, kailangan mo na siyang palitan to reduce the risk. Okay? Isolate mo yung hazard or use engineering controls to modify the existing machinery or plant or purchase different machinery to provide a physical solution. So ito na yung level 2. Medyo high level to kasi magastos na to. Magpapalitan na tayo. So hindi na kaya yung madadaling controls na binigay ninyo. Kailangan mo na lang level 2, higher level. Okay? So level 3 is normally considered last since they do not control the source of the hazard but sometimes rely on human behavior or supervision. So examples include developing administrative procedures or work instructions for safe use of the machinery or even the use of PPE. Kasi alam naman natin lahat, no? Lahat required to use PPE. Pero sometimes, some people, they forget to use pa rin. Parang nandun pa rin siya. Meron ka na control, sinabi mo na, gamitin yung PPE mo. Pero still, again, human behavior ang problema mo. So, hindi mo rin sila gawa na sundin yung iyong sinasabi. Okay? And then finally, your risk assessment, your HIRAC will not be complete without your monitor and reviewing. Okay? So, next slide. Dun sa reviewing mo, you have to establish a regular review. So HIRAC is an ongoing process. Therefore, regular review is needed to evaluate the effectiveness of the controls instituted. And pag nakita nyo na na-control mo na siya, next round mo, pwede mo na siyang tanggalin. Okay? But you have to conduct your HIRAC whenever there is a new change in your workplace. Halimbawa, meron kang new equipment or nagpalit ka ng positions or nilipat mo yung desk mo dun sa ganito, ganyan, sa pagpapalit, no? Or nag-change ka ng grounding, yung ground mo na sand lang dati, ngayon sedimento mo na. Anong pagkakaiba? Yung semento mo madulas pagbasa, di ba? So, you have to, again, review your risk kasi iba na yung hazard nung sementado dun sa hindi. Okay? And then, you maintain the records of the risk management process kasi it assists in decision making and controls implementation and effectiveness. Okay? So all of these things, if you follow this, you're doing HIRAC, lahat yan nakakatulong sa pag-establish ng iyong occupational safety and health management. Okay, so when you're doing your OSHM plan, no, you need to do your HIRAC, and the more risk, the more hazards you have identified, the better, because it will tell you that you will be eliminating most of the problems which you will be encountering in your manufacturing area. Okay, so that's the end of my lecture. I hope I have been able to enlighten you on HIRAC. Remember, yung HIRAC natin, ano lang to, in passing lang. No? So when you're doing risk assessment particularly, meron pang issue dyan na i-rate mo yung risk mo, kukunin mo yung percentage risk nito dun sa buong paano ka. So medyo complicated pa yung risk assessment procedure mo. It will take me more than another 2 or 3 days to talk about everything. So hanggang dito na lang muna tayo sa introduction. Okay? So thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, we can look at it now.
Thank you so much, Doc Beten, for the very comprehensive discussion po. Okay, so may question ba tayo? It's actually beyond 5 na po pala. So, opo. So, if we have, kasi late na rin po kami nakapag-start. If we have questions na lang rin, okay, so we encourage the student to send this to the instructors or direct. Okay lang ba, Doc Ben, directly to you po?
Yeah, sure.
Okay po. This, pahabol ko lang rin po, itatanong ko lang if pwede ba namin i-share itong lecture niyo sa itong lecture material PowerPoint po sa class. And
Ah.
thank you so much po.
Sige.
So, let me just, give you this certificate of appreciation. Okay,
Yeah.
so this certificate of appreciation is awarded to Dr. Elia Di Clemente for sharing her knowledge and expertise as resource speaker in a special lecture of MatE 15, Principles of Materials Engineering Practice entitled Application of HIRAC to Occupational Safety and Health, given this 27th of July via Zoom. Okay, so signed by the three of us na MatE 15 handlers.
Thank you very
so,
much.
Thank you so much, Doc Beng.
Yeah.
Po. So for our class purposes na lang din, okay, so we have an activity aside from the reflection paper na i-upload na lang rin namin via Oble, we also have an activity for the HIRAC. Okay, so activity 5 yon, viewable na supposedly since Monday. Okay, so paki-check na lang yung Oble for those activities. So may announcement po ba sila Sir Ken and Sir Jeffrey? Okay, so since wala na tayong another announcement for our class purposes, okay, so thank you so much for